Emma Hayes is set to become the new U.S. Women's National Team head coach. So let's talk about it. Well, the worst kept secret for however long it was a secret for is finally revealed. It's out. Emma Hayes is set to become the U.S. Women's National Team head coach. The timing of the announcement from both the club, Chelsea, and the U.S. Federation was quite interesting, given that the initial announcement was made after Chelsea had just beaten Aston Villa 6-0. It literally was moments after that final whistle went off. And then almost a week and a half later, during match day 1 of the Champions League group stages, and almost 24 hours before Chelsea took on Real Madrid, it was announced that she was going to become and set to be the next U.S. Women's National Team head coach. Obviously, there's lots to talk about here. I think what's super interesting now is you get to see the international game have two of the best women's head coaches. If Sarina Wiegman and Emma Hayes, you always had the conversation of who is the best female head coach in the women's game. Is it Sarina Wiegman? Is it Emma Hayes? Now we're finally going to get a closer answer to that question, given that they're both at the international stage. And I think that prospect just changes the game a little bit. Some of those effects and changes and the impact on the women's game is already being seen, and she hasn't even really taken that role ahead just yet. And that impact being that Emma Hayes is going to be paid exactly the same as the men's head coach for the U.S. men's national team, which is estimated to be 1.6 to 2 million US dollars. The U.S. Federation has quite literally led the fight in the international game of equity pay, of merchandise, of equality. I mean, if every single thing that's being achieved in the international stage, the U.S. Federation and the U.S. players, it's because the players fought their federation for that, have led and paved that way. Emma Hayes has practically changed and made what Chelsea Football Club is on the women's side what it is today. And we'll chat a little bit more about Chelsea, but Emma Hayes has continuously advocated for higher standards, for better commercial structures, raise in pay. She's also broken multiple transfer deals when she brought in Pernilla Harder, when she brought in Lauren James at the time. Now we know both of those records have been broken, but in the WSL, in the European stage, she broke a lot of those records. She advocated for so much. She changed so much. She set so many different records. And the U.S. Federation and their players have kind of done the same way. So now you get to see this reunion, or not even a reunion, this union of coming together of Emma Hayes and the U.S. Federation, looking at the other head coaches and the other federations and seeing the disparity of what their men's to their women's head coaches get paid is peanuts. Like Sarina Wiegman compared to Southgate is literally earning pennies, which is just ridiculous to think when you look at the success and the change that Sarina Wiegman made for English football. I mean, we're not just talking about the Lionesses. I think we all have to recognize what the Lionesses have done and won has quite literally revolutionized that English scene, that WSL, those records that you're seeing post Euros. Sarina Wiegman has played a huge part in that. And so with the U.S. Federation already achieving equal pay with their head coaches, and honestly, you could argue Emma Hayes should be earning more. Looking at the record that the U.S. men's national team is on and kind of what they've won over the past few years compared to what Emma Hayes has done, you could definitely argue Emma Hayes should be paid a little bit more, but I think that conversation will approach to later on down the line. To add on to that, since we're talking about money, the U.S. Federation was able to do when bringing Emma Hayes is because they've got a shit ton of money. I mean, they were in a very terrible position following the World Cup, which was a disaster by their standards and by many standards. That was not the U.S. Women's National Team. That era of how dominant the U.S. Women's National Team, we seen them fade. And that Olympics was kind of the start of the end of things. And only a federation with that much money and that much power can throw in that much money to bring in Emma Hayes and take her out of Chelsea. Like, you've got to realize the U.S. Federation is lucky in the manner that they've invested in the women's game so much that they have this budget to spend on. When they're in a terrible situation, they can put in a lot of money to bring in a personnel like Emma Hayes. In a FIFA report that came out in the summer, and I actually dissected very closely, so if you're interested in that video, I'll definitely leave a link below, but the US Federation was revealed to have the biggest budget of the women's game in terms of spending, in terms of payment, in terms of their staffing as well. It's a big empire, but they got to the point that they got because of the structure that they have in place, because of the amount of money that they dumped in the early 2000s and the late 90s. So yes, we can say the Federation is very lucky to have the amount of money that they do at disposal to throw at Emma Hayes and bring her in. But that did not just come out of thin air. That did not just somehow appear in 2023 where they were like, oh, we're kind of in trouble. Actually, not to worry. We've got all the money we need to bring in Emma Hayes. No. And obviously the big question is, what does the U.S. Women's National Team look like under Emma Hayes? It's a question you can't answer until we get to see them kick a ball under the supervision of Emma Hayes and Emma Hayes make that first roster call up. But I think even just looking at what Emma Hayes has done with Chelsea and what the U.S. Women's National Team needs right now, you can kind of get to see a lot of these components melody together. From the get-go, Emma Hayes is a very direct and brave person that is willing to take hard decisions that maybe are not favored by the entire roster, and kind of have that tough love with her players. You see that on display on the field. I'm not even talking behind the scenes, but you see that with Chelsea. If she's trailing behind 30 minutes in, and that means she needs to take a player off, she absolutely will make a substitution 35 minutes in. Like, not an issue, which is substitutions, making decisions on the spot, and just being direct is exactly what the U.S. Women's National Team has lacked. And we saw that on big display at the World Cup. I mean, Vlatko's lack of substitutions, and I'm not talking about like the first half, I'm talking about the latter stages of the game where desperate call for fresh legs was happening and you needed to see a different set of players. He wouldn't do that. There was no willingness to take that hard decision. And so, with Emma Hayes on the pitch during a game, Emma Hayes is not scared to take a direct call. She's known to turn things around when she needs to. There's a clear show of fight and bravery from her players. Specifically, you could say in the last 4 or 5 years from Chelsea. The players believe in her. I mean, the way they talk about her in press conferences and interviews, they trust Emma Hayes. They trust what she brings into camp. She trusts how she's preparing them. And again, you did not see that strong belief from the U.S. Women's National Team camp at the Olympics or at the World Cup. Her style of football is very much like her, direct. There's a heavy emphasis on moving the ball really quickly, especially up front, making the most out of your possession and being overall clinical everywhere. Sloppiness is not a word you associate with Emma Hayes' football. For many seasons in the WSL and even in the Champions League, Chelsea sat with some of the highest speed of attacking play. That's no surprise that she's consistently done that at Chelsea. And that's mainly because of the focus she has on attacking brilliance and simply being athletic up top. In the middle, it's all about midfield excellence, never slowing down, always looking for the right pass, always looking for the right pocket, moving around, losing a marker. In the midfield, it's superb work. The back line is just as important in driving these long balls. And again, we have seen in the past 2 or 3 seasons that Millie Bright-Sam Kerr connection. I mean, that long ball that she loves to thread between them is just so dangerous and always works so well. So you've got a back line that, again, is so good in providing service up top, but is also really good in maintaining its shape when defending. She doesn't concede many goals. And I know specifically this season, even last season, there was a lot of injuries with Millie Bright, Eriksson, Buchanan even was out towards the end of the season. But even despite these injuries that she consistently faces in the back line, she doesn't concede a lot of goals. Definitely not enough goals to lose a run of games. Fast and effective football is what made the U.S. Women's National Team so dangerous for so many years. And that is exactly what Emma Hayes brings. An effective style of football. It's an engine in the middle. It's fast. It's direct. Like, that's a scary thought to know that is being reunited again on the pitch for the Americans with Hayes. At the same time, we can talk about how the Americans are kind of in a transitional phase. You're obviously seeing Megan Rapinoe make way out. Alex Morgan, I would say she's kind of on that path now. But you've got an abundance of talent that hasn't necessarily gotten the exposure or the minutes that they deserve, or players that aren't necessarily youngsters, but they haven't been called up. Emma Hayes has a very good eye in developing youngsters and pushing the stars that have already kind of established themselves as stars into bigger potential. You think of Niamh Charles. She came from Liverpool and she looked like one type of player, and now she looks like a completely different type of player. Ji So-yeon, like absolutely one of the best midfielders to grace the WSL. She came in as, a relatively talented young player, but has become, or obviously now she's left the WSL, but left as absolutely one of the most technically well-skilled midfielders in the game. Hannah Blundell, I thought she had a massive burst of skill set working under Emma Hayes. Lauren James now, I mean, man, is she absolutely terrifying. Those are youngsters and players that Emma Hayes changed their game so much and made them such incredible players. But also at the same time, she's been able to unleash more potential of, like I mentioned, the already set players like Sam Kerr. I mean, she has become Sam Kerr that we know today under Emma Hayes. Gura Wrighton, Magdalena Eriksson when she was her captain. She's so good in both developing the rookies and getting the most out of the veterans, and that is such a good balance. That's exactly what the Americans need. You've got some of the veterans in there. Again, Crystal Dunn, Emily Sonnet, Kelly O'Hara, Alex Morgan. Those are the players that are still probably going to be included in the mix. And you need to make sure you're getting the most out of your veterans and the established players. But also develop the youngsters. Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith. The amount of players that she gets to work with now is scary. Macario, Fischel. She's working with them at Chelsea. She's going to be working with them in the U.S. Women's National Team. Like, it's a scary thought, I think, for a lot of international opponents now. Now, this is not to say that there's definitely been a few players that she wasn't able to work out properly, fully with. Either that was because of a run of injuries, or simply she had fallen out with, or they didn't work out in the system that she wanted. And I think that happens with every squad. I think with every season, you kind of have that off player that just never worked out in the squad. And I don't know, thinking about like their closest rivals of Arsenal, for example. You look at Mana Iwabuchi. I mean, it was a horrendous decision to go to Arsenal because we've seen how it played out. So I think every manager definitely has a few players that don't work out, or the plan doesn't go how it needed to go. But with Emma Hayes, the majority of the players that she's worked with have reached success. When you look at Emma Hayes and the players that she's helped really burst into international scene, you have to think like Jess Carter. And we've seen that in the Chelsea documentary of her having a very brutally hard conversation of like, why are you at Chelsea? Do you want to play for your country or not? And Jess Carter's like, I actually don't know. And look at how she's become. I mean, arguably one of the best 1v1 defenders in the game. So Emma Hayes, sure, she's going to have a few spotty players on her record, but in the general consensus, you're getting a very good balance with, again, working with rookies and a very good balance working with veterans. The question becomes, well, what happens to Chelsea? I mean, obviously, we've seen there's been a few of the assistant coaches that she's taking with her, but I don't think she leaves Chelsea without a plan. I think when we talk about Chelsea in this era, it's under the Emma Hayes era. So I don't think she's leaving without a plan. I don't think she's leaving with some promises to the players of what's going to come after her. She's definitely working very, very closely with the board, with the recruiters. I think there's a lot of players that have their contracts up, wink, wink, Sam Kerr, and a few others. So she's not leaving them in limbo. She's obviously finishing the season with them and then transferring into the international scene, but she's not going to leave them without a plan of who comes into the transition. So yes, it's very tough on the players to know that Emma Hayes is leaving because they've only ever played for Chelsea under Emma Hayes, but she doesn't leave them without a solid plan. And obviously there's going to be a lot of speculation, a lot of questions of who replaces her. Casey Stoney is being thrown into the conversation. I personally don't think Casey Stoney is the person to take on this role, specifically knowing that she doesn't have any experience in the Champions League or of that European scene, really. A head coach that I think they most definitely will be looking at right now is Reynold Pedros, who was just working with the Moroccan women's national team, took him to the World Cup, competed with them at the World Cup, now is currently not working, but he's won Champions League with Lyon before. He's a manager that is relatively proven, you could say, in the Champions League scene in European football. He's won Champions Leagues, like I mentioned. He's won titles with Lyon. He's a proven manager when it comes to winning. And he's also done a good stint in the international scene. So you get a manager who's pretty well-rounded in terms of both club success and international success for sure. If I was the Chelsea board right now, that's who I'm looking at. Reinhold Pedros, not Casey Stoney. I need somebody who has experience in the Champions League. In fact, better, who's won the Champions League. Like I mentioned, he is also a head coach that doesn't have a job right now. So this is a person that you can bring in from the start of the summer, run an entire summer transfer window with him, have pre-camp with him. This is not a head coach that you're kind of buying out of a contract or waiting for his club season to end or an international camp to end and then bring him over. So Reinhold Pedros is definitely a head coach that Chelsea must be studying and definitely making contact with. And I will not be surprised if they do go with him, because he does look like a very suitable candidate for what Chelsea might be looking at. But for many of us, we've only ever known the WSL and Chelsea with Emma Hayes. She's been there for over a decade. 2012, she took over Chelsea. Look at the empire she's built. Look at the trophy cabinet she's put together. Look at the team that she's assembled. Look at the players she's produced. I mean, it's absolutely frightening. So for the audience, it's definitely going to be different. How Chelsea looks like, the players that decide to leave, how the recruiting process looks like after she's gone, again, is up in the air. It's questions. We know how involved Emma Hayes was in bringing the players into the club. She had a very active voice in scouting. She had a very active voice in contract negotiations. Emma Hayes is practically not going to be in that anymore. And like I mentioned, she's not leaving the team in a limbo. There's going to be a lot of plans that she's putting together. She is going to make sure that the team is looked after when she leaves. For head coaches in the WSL and the Champions League, they're probably very, very happy to know this news, that beating Chelsea just got a little bit easier probably now, especially in a transitional phase. Next season is going to be a transitional phase. For the international scene, their job just got 10 times harder. And I speak about this as a Canadian, obviously seeing the US kind of being a bit of a downfall in the past few years, and Canada take advantage of that, specifically at the Olympics, winning the Olympics. Now Beth Priestman has a much, much tougher job, knowing that the US is going to be in every CONCACAF, in every Continental Cup, basically anything happening in the North American region. Beth Priestman now has to face Emma Hayes. So for a Canadian like myself, I say this in a biased way, but it has made things much, much harder. I am not a fan of disappointment, because beating the US was already hard enough, and now it's just got a little bit harder. So, however, I do hope that when she jumps into the international scene and takes over the US Women's National Team, the expectations are not absolutely ludicrous and through the roof. You cannot expect a manager who, sure, I've just praised very highly, but you have to consider the fact that she's never coached an international side. How you assemble a team together, the amount of camps that you have, the amount of sessions that you have with players, it's different. How you break down games for the players, the amount of team meetings, just the preparation overall is completely different for the international squad compared to a club squad. You can't buy players and pick players from anywhere in the world. There's a pool that you have to work with. We've seen managers thrive when they're making that switch. We've seen managers absolutely horrendously fail when they make that jump. I don't think Emma Hayes is going to fail, but there definitely needs to be a moment of grace in terms of her adjusting into the situation and being able to obviously adapt to it. Now, I'm sure she's very familiar with a lot of the US talent, a lot of the US players, so it's not going to be like, oh my god, I don't know the pool that I'm working with. She definitely has eyes on every player that could be making that squad. For now, though, Chelsea fans will definitely be enjoying her for the next few months until the conclusion of the WSL season. Most definitely herself and her players want to bring in trophies, end on a high note, and just kind of put that cherry on top before she leaves the WSL. And afterwards, it's going to be very, very interesting when the World Cup rolls around, when the Olympics roll around, when Serena Wiegmann versus Emma Hayes goes head to head. I mean, man, that is going to be so good, and I cannot wait. Let me know your thoughts on this appointment. Has the U.S. Federation got this right? Has the U.S. Women's National Team got it right? Is there worry to be around Chelsea? Is it going to work out? Let me know your thoughts, your opinions. There's definitely a lot to share, and I'd love to hear it. Now, as always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.